So thanks to Todd, Vicky, Winona in the Student Life office. I'm assuming that you all will help continue admit people.
Yes.
Okay,
yes.
thank you, because I may miss them if I'm multitasking. So thanks.
We have 39. We have 39 so far. So it's
Really good.
Yeah.
So everybody ready to get started? All right, well, all right, welcome to Constitution Day at DVC, Diablo Valley College. It is September 16th, 2021. I am the host of today's proceedings. Special thanks. Oh, my name is Mickey Huff. So I am the host. I am a professor of social science, history, and journalism at Diablo Valley College. I am co-chair of history area in the social sciences. I am also chair of the journalism department. Among the many other hats I'm wearing today and other days is I'm president of the Media Freedom Foundation and director of Project Censored, which is a media watchdog group that's been around since 1976. That is a pro-free press organization that combats media censorship. You can learn more about our work at projectcensored.org, and we're a very student-centered group around critical media literacy education. So again, we've got a great schedule here today of speakers, so I'm going to get going. Again, welcome. Special thanks to Todd Farr and everybody in the Student Life Office at DVC. Also, I'd like to thank all of our co-sponsors for today, and these include the Student Life Office, the Journalism Department, the Social Justice Program, the Social Sciences and History area, also, of course, Media Freedom Foundation and Project Censored. Of course, thanks to all of you for being with us today. As always, once we present various perspectives on the day's topics from our esteemed panel, we look forward to opening up the conversation with all of you for Q&A and commentary with our guests this afternoon. You can use the chat feature if you like, but we also like to have students or participants, people that want to participate, you can come on and actually talk directly when we come to the Q&A, and I will host and moderate to facilitate that here this afternoon. Well, here we are for Constitution Day, which is actually tomorrow, but we're doing it today on September 16th. Going back to 1787, right? That's when the Constitution was signed at the beginning of the United States, right? After the Articles of Confederation. I would say more importantly for today's purposes, 1791, we're 230 years on from the Bill of Rights, the adoption of the Bill of Rights this year. And today I have the honor of hosting this timely expert panel discussion about the First Amendment, the relationship between power and free speech and democratic culture, the recent rise of so-called cancel culture, right? We want to keep our historical talks, right? They're historically contextual, but we also want them to be contemporaneous and relevant to the many things that are going on here with us today. We're going to relate how these relate to key current events and issues about which the public has a right to know, consider, discuss, and debate both on and off campus. So the title of our presentation today is Cancel This Talk: Academic Freedom, Cancel Culture, and the First Amendment. We're going to cover a wide array of things. Each of our speakers has a unique perspective, a different angle to share. And just so you know, among the many hats I'm wearing here today, I'm hosting and moderating, but of course I'm also one of the speakers. And so I'll kick off the panel with a really truncated history of the First Amendment and democracy and why this matters to all of us. So our panelists, let me introduce our panelists briefly. Dan Kovalik teaches international human rights at the University of Pittsburgh Law School. He's the author of several books on US imperialism, most recently, the newly released Cancel This Book: The Progressive Case Against Cancel Culture. Dan and I did a couple events over the summer and last spring, so you can see I'm kind of riffing off of his sort of Abby Hoffman-esque clever title there for today's event. So Dan Kovalik, welcome. Thanks for joining us today. Mnar Muhawesh Adley also joins us. Oh, by the way, Dan Kovalik joins us from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. One of the benefits from Zoom is that I was able to pull in, a lot of folks from our network that we work with and get different diversity of views, bring in more people for our students in the DVC community. Mnar Muhawesh Adley joins us from Minnesota, editor-in-chief and founder of MintPress News and Behind the Headlines. Mnar is a Palestinian-American who has been at the receiving end of censorship, deplatforming, and online threats for her courageous journalism, and has been an outspoken critic of powerful censors, whether from government or the corporate and big tech sector. So Mnar Adley, welcome to our panel today. Thanks so much for joining us. Nolan Higdon, media studies and history scholar, joins us. He's also part of the DVC faculty, as well as the faculty at places like St. Mary's, CSU East Bay, and UC Santa Cruz. He is the author of several books on media, including The Anatomy of Fake News, A Critical News Literacy Education. Forthcoming next month, The Podcaster's Dilemma, Decolonizing Podcasters in an Era of Surveillance Capitalism. And Nolan is co-author with me of United States of Distraction, which is a book we did for City Lights, United States of Distraction, Media Manipulation in Post-Truth America and What We Can Do About It, as well as the forthcoming Routledge textbook on critical thinking and constructive discourse. That'll be out next spring. It's titled Let's Agree to Disagree, A Critical Thinking Guide to Communication, Conflict Management, and Critical Media Literacy, ever germane to today's conversation. Nolan, welcome. Thanks for joining us today. Sangha Niyogi is professor of sociology at the Apple Valley College and has a PhD in sociology from the University of California, Davis. Sangha specializes in race, ethnicity, and immigration. She has presented at numerous conferences and published in journals, including Cultural Sociology and the Oxford Encyclopedia of American Social History. Dr. Niyogi is the initiator and co-director of the Social Justice Program at DVC. I am honored that I teach in that program with our colleague, Dr. Albert Ponce. Sangha also co-chairs the Student Equity and Success Committee and Student Equity Work Group that oversees our college's highly impactful equity speaker series. You can learn more at the DVC website, dvc.edu. Any of our speakers today, please feel free to share any information, contact information, sites to get more information. This is all about education. It's all about community. And it's all about really celebrating the spirit of the freedom of expression, the freedom of speech, not only the right to speak and express, but the right to be heard and the right to listen. Right. And so that's what we're going to be getting into here today. So shifting hats as the first speaker on the panel, I've got a timer set, so I'm going to try to keep to our own rules today at 10 minutes. Brevity is not a strong point of mine. Certainly, it's not a strong point of anybody on this panel, but we want to get some different viewpoints and perspectives here and honor the spirit of the forum. And we absolutely want to hear from everybody that's taken time to join us today. So thank you once again. So I'm going to begin laying out a brief history of First Amendment cases that illustrate principles of free speech with caveats and legal limitations, right? We're not talking about absolutism here, but also as related to issues around academic freedom, censorship, and the current cancel culture climate, which isn't new, but it's sort of got a new label and has been something that people have been paying attention to. Each panelist will have about 10 minutes to discuss their area of expertise around the topic, sharing their perspectives and main points for consideration, and then we'll open it for Q&A. The event is being recorded, so if you don't want to have your likeness on, be sure to turn off your camera and so forth. As I said earlier, this is an announcement for those joining us late, but this event will be made available later, so those not here will be able to see it if they are interested. The abolitionist Frederick Douglass, a former slave, speaking to a group of abolitionists in Boston in December of 1860, once said, quote, "No right was deemed by the fathers of the government more sacred than the right of speech. It was in their eyes, as in the eyes of all thoughtful men, the great moral renovator of society and government. To suppress free speech is a double wrong, according to Douglass. It violates the rights of the hearer as well as those of the speaker," with, again, apologies for the gendered language coming out of the 1860s. Well, look, this isn't only about free speech and expression. It's also about the right to be heard, the right to listen, especially to ideas that we may find abhorrent. And the best antidote to speech with which we disagree is not censorship, but in fact, more free speech. And I'm sure we'll have different views from our panelists today, but I wanted to start with the history and trajectory of the notion of free speech in the US in particular. We might also think about the consequences of speech, including offense versus harm, and of course, the current manifestations of cancel culture. There's a lot to cover. So again, switching the host speaker here, I'll begin and then hand things off to our esteemed panelists. Hopefully we'll have at least 30 minutes at the end of today's proceedings for participation. Why are we focusing on the First Amendment, especially free speech? The First Amendment and free speech are essential to having a democratic republic. And in the US, the conception of freedom of speech and censorship are framed by the First Amendment in the US Constitution, something we're celebrating here today. The 5 freedoms protected by the First Amendment of the Bill of Rights include religion, speech, expression, assembly, and the press. And several years ago, when polled in the United States, about 25% of Americans could name 5 of the fictitious characters on the TV show The Simpsons, but only 1 in 1,000 could name all of those rights protected under the Bill of Rights. It's difficult to practice or exercise rights that you don't know you have or don't understand, so that's significant. Well, look, these principles long predate the founding of the United States, actually. We can go all the way back to ancient Greece, you can probably go further, but Andy Lee Roth of Project Censored remind us, pulling from the work of 20th century philosopher Michel Foucault, the Athenians had what they called parrhesia, which literally translated into saying everything. Parrhesia is a form of truth-telling. It was seen as a moral activity that was a central characteristic of Athenian democracy, different than ours, but still a central principle. And this belief that liberty rests upon unfettered free speech is such a defining feature in our country that it's been shared by the privileged and unprivileged alike, like slave owner Thomas Jefferson and those battling this most horrific form of exploitation and oppression, like former slave Frederick Douglass. Jefferson, in his first inaugural address, spoke in favor of unfettered free speech by saying, quote, "Error of opinion may be tolerated where reason is left free to combat it." Well, moving through the early history of the US, free speech protections moved beyond elite political classes, and they played a key role in advancing pro-democracy movements for civil rights, voting rights, women's rights, and abolitionism. Back to Douglass in 1860, at that same speech, the radical abolitionist Frederick Douglass said, quote, "Liberty is meaningless where the right to utter one's thoughts and opinions has ceased to exist. That all of rights is the dread of tyrants. It is the right which they first of all strike down. They know its power. Slavery cannot tolerate free speech." This message can easily be extended to other hierarchical arrangements of power in purportedly free societies, as illustrated by the open and free expression of suffragists leading to the formal inclusion of women into the civic sphere by 1919 in the US, when they won the right to vote and participate in federal elections. So moving ahead, despite its perceived centrality to democracy, limitations on the First Amendment have been debated through US history, starting with the Alien Sedition Acts of 1798, to the Espionage and Sedition Acts of 1917 and 18 of World War I, all the way to the present day's so-called war on terrorism. Certain forms of speech and expression have been suppressed and deemed punishable by the government. A prominent example: during the First World War, thousands of people were imprisoned and deported for protesting the war, including socialist Eugene Debs, who was arrested, tried, and sentenced to 10 years in prison under the Sedition Act for delivering an anti-war speech in Canton, Ohio. Debs urged working people not to join the war efforts, which would contribute to bank profits and mass violence against other working people, thus obstructing the draft, which was considered illegal as it interfered with the government's war effort. So we can see where these rights collide. Debs ran for president from prison in the Socialist Party for the Socialist Party, garnering almost 1 million votes. His sentence was subsequently commuted by President Warren Harding in 1921, interestingly enough. Well, while upholding free speech restrictions during the First World War, there have been numerous attempts to expand and protect freedom of speech, most famously Supreme Court Justice Louis Brandeis, who wrote in 1927 Whitney versus California decision that, quote, "No danger flowing from speech can be deemed clear and present unless the incidence of the evil apprehended is so imminent that it may befall before there is opportunity for full discussion. So if there be time to expose through discussion the falsehood and fallacies to avert the evil by the process of education, the remedy to be applied is more speech, not enforced silence." right? So that's another key issue that we want to be mindful of here as we move forward. I'm going to skip ahead because there's a lot of cases, but I want to give people their time as well. By 1929, U.S. versus Schwimmer, Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes wrote, quote, "If there is any principle in the U.S. Constitution that more imperatively calls for attachment than any other, it's the principle of free thought. Not free thought for those who agree with us, but freedom for the thought we hate." And although that was a dissenting opinion at the time, Holmes' remarks serve as a basis for future generations to for political free thought and to strengthen freedom of speech and expression. Not long after Mnar versus Minnesota in 1931, the same court further protected free speech in the press by ruling that prior restraint on publications is unconstitutional. Justice Charles Evan Hughes noted in a ruling that, quote, "It is no longer open to doubt that the liberty of the press and speech is within the liberty safeguard by due process clause of the 14th Amendment from invasion by state action." This is important, right? These are very important cases in our history that pave the way to the United Nations Article 19 after World War II and the Nazis that said everyone has the right to freedom of opinion and expression. This right includes freedom to hold opinions without interference and to seek, receive, and impart information and ideas through any media and regardless of frontiers. So this has influenced international perspectives on free speech and expression. This influenced the free speech movement of the 1960s. Mario Savio and First Amendment allies centered around the University of California, Berkeley, right? Very important movement that came out of the Bay Area. I could go through and talk about the significance of whistleblowers, the Pentagon Papers and Dan Ellsberg, many others. Again, this idea of civil courage goes all the way back to Parisia, the idea of the right to it, not just to say anything, but we're talking about fearless speech that speaks truth to power as a form of power. And so it's really important that we remember that speech is a really important part of the democratic process. So I'm going to have to wrap up here in a moment, but I wanted to note that this continues, right? Our free speech issues and debates continued after the events of 9/11. We just moved 20 years past it. The USA Patriot Act had serious encroachments to the First, Fourth, Fifth, Sixth, Eighth Amendments in particular, targeting whistleblowers, activists, racial and ethnic minorities, freedoms and freedom of expression and religion. But it also drew serious criticism from the right and the left. So Republicans like Bob Barr and Arlen Specter, right, on the right, and then more progressive coalitions like the Bill of Rights Defense Committee, now defending rights and dissent in the early 21st century, they fought against these free speech restrictions. And I think we need to be very mindful that there are coalitions across the ideological spectrum that understand the importance of free speech. We also deal in the present with so-called ag-gag bills, where people are criminalized for discussing cruelty around factory farming. Over half the US states have passed laws to anti-BDS laws. Mnar might talk about that, efforts for boycott, divestment, and sanctions. Again, so, and then the rise of cancel culture, right? And whether we're canceling on the right or the left, we're seeing a growing case for censorship of expression that I find quite alarming. This, of course, includes the triggering of the fake news debacle that was all the rage during the Trump administration. So with that, the rest of our speakers have so much to argue and so much to say. And I want to finish on this front. And again, I didn't even get into hate speech, which I know Sangha and others may talk about, but it's really important to understand that free speech doesn't mean particularly the right to say anything without consequence. And that's a really important thing to remember. And I think that the current debates about freedom of speech and censorship are further complicated by the advent of the internet and the dysfunctions of social media platforms. But this does not mean that these discussions are not worth having. Quite the contrary, they may be the most important matters we consider as a society today. So with that, I thank all of you. I hope that that at least gave us some sort of introductory context that many of our panelists may be riffing on and picking up on threads of that. And then I look forward to hearing from all of you later on in the presentation. So thank you once again. Thank you so much for being here. And with that, I want to turn things over to our first guest, author of Cancel This Book, The Progressive Case Against Cancel Culture, Dan Kovalik. Dan, the floor is yours.
Mickey, thank you. And thank you everyone in attendance. I'm very excited about this panel and the opportunity to speak. Just, I guess, by way of introduction, so you know where I'm coming from. I mean, I'm an old school leftist, been an activist since I was in college in the 1980s, I guess. Wow. Okay, that was a long time ago. And I'm still an activist today. With that said, I have a lot of issues with some of the things happening amongst, within the left today, which I'll get into. But let me just start, so as Mickey pointed out, the thing I'm most interested in and I write most about is anti-imperialism. I oppose US intervention in other countries. I oppose US wars. This is one of the most controversial positions to take. As Mickey noted, people like Eugene V. Debs in the early 20th century went to jail for opposing wars, even though Debs and his friends were right. World War I resulted in the deaths of millions of people, and World War II, which followed it, inexorably from World War I, killed millions more. But those who've spoken out against war, those who have revealed things about war, like Julian Assange, like Snowden. There's the whistleblower now who's in jail who revealed the civilian casualties of our drone program. I'm forgetting his name. David, Mickey, do you remember his name, or Mnar? What's that?
Daniel Hale.
Daniel Hale, yes.
On drone strikes and civilian deaths, and was unironically sentenced the day before National Whistleblower Day. But
yes, incredible. And so we still see people going to jail for these things. Well, I'll throw out another guy who I admire, like Gary Webb from your part of the world. You may or may not have heard of him. He wrote for the San Jose Mercury News. He was the one that uncovered the CIA Contra cocaine connection. How the CIA was funding the Contras illegally after Congress cut off aid by selling cocaine on the streets of the United States. He was pilloried for these articles he wrote called The Dark Web. It was a series of articles. And so much so that he ends up, at least according to the coroner, committing suicide, though with 2 bullets. So you can think about that for a little bit. These are heroes, and we need to fight for these people. And I say this because, I agree with Noam Chomsky, who's also, again, primarily an anti-imperialist. And he said the one thing we have going for us in this country is a brisk freedom of speech that very few countries have. I mean, most countries, certainly in the developed world, have a certain amount of freedom of speech, but we have probably the briskest, right? And that allows people like me and others to oppose war and to oppose the system. When I was, and I'll give an example of this. When I just got back from Syria, my second trip to Syria this year, and we were making a documentary. We were interviewing 2 individuals. They were the parents of the home, and they were very honest how they opposed U.S. imperialism, how they thought the U.S. had destroyed Syria, blah, blah, blah. And when we finished that interview, their daughter said, are you going to show this in the U.S.? Are you going to show this to Americans? Are you afraid you're going to go to jail or lose your job? Listen to what my parents are saying. And I said, honestly, I'm not really worried about that. I do have a certain amount of free speech rights, and I value those. I think when I was younger, I didn't value them as much as I do today, because I see that I am able to speak out in ways that I otherwise would not be able to. So let me bring this to maybe some more particulars and relate it a little to cancel culture. The reason I wrote my book called Cancel This Book was because of something that happened here in Pittsburgh. There was a lifelong peace activist named Molly Rush, who is in peace circles is very well known. She helped form, amongst other things, the Thomas Merton Center of Pittsburgh. It is one of the longest standing peace and justice centers of its kind in the US. She helped co-found it over 50 years ago. And she's done a lot of work against nuclear war, for peace, but also for racial justice. Did a lot of work which resulted in African-American construction workers being allowed to work in construction and get into the construction unions, which had been historically racist, etc. Well, last summer, during the George Floyd protest, which she supported, by the way, she posted a meme on Facebook. And the meme had a picture of Martin Luther King, and it said, "Never looted, never rioted, change the world," which some people took umbrage at and were offended by, which I can certainly understand. She tried to argue that, well, this is really I'm just opposing some of the violence surrounding some of these protests. And of course, I'm a lifetime pacifist, so that's where I'm coming from. People really piled on her, attacked her on Facebook, and then she took down the post and she apologized publicly. But this was not enough for people. They continued to call for further punishment of her, and ultimately the Thomas Merton Center itself put out a letter that they posted on Facebook, sent to all members, and said, because of this meme, they actually said because of a racist meme, which they didn't explain what that was, so you couldn't decide for yourself whether it was racist or not. They were disassociating from Molly Rush. They would not work with her anymore, and they actually took her name off the website as a co-founder of the organization, kind of in a rewriting of history, which really devastated her. She's 85 years old, so this was kind of happening at the end of her life, and it seemed to me needlessly. And this really troubled me for many reasons, because I felt that she was dealt with in a way that was not compassionate or forgiving, which offered no redemption. For what I saw was, if it was a mistake, it was a small one in the context of many other things happening in the world. And it troubled me that this happened, and it made me think of a number of things. One, it was interesting to me, in light of what I just said, that it was a peace activist that got this treatment. I think that some of what happened was because the progressive movement in Pittsburgh and elsewhere has moved beyond peace activism. There isn't much peace activism anymore. And so it wasn't just about the meme. This was kind of a long-term process of rooting out the old-time peace activists, which has happened at the Merton Center. Which interests me as well, and again, maybe this seems tangential, but when I was younger and I was an activist in college, I really liked the old timers, and I still do. A lot of my mentors are older people, like by a generation, even to this day. I always got a lot out of them. Doesn't mean I agreed with everything they said, but I always learned a lot from them. And now there seems to be, if I may be so bold, I think kind of an ageist thing that's going on. I think there's a lot of, in the progressive community, a disdain for our elders, that they're seen as having old time views, they're out of touch, which they could be in some cases, but there's little attempt to kind of get them in touch. It's more about just getting them out of the way, which we see happening a lot. We see this professor up the road at Portland State who just resigned over, the fact that he felt he was not able to teach in the way he wanted to, again, because he was policed over various issues of, for lack of a better word, wokeness. And so we see the very people who should be valuing free speech attacking free speech. And there's a certain irony to it, because you see people uniting with corporate leadership, with university leadership, to punish people who they think are not enlightened enough, right? So it's this odd thing where you see progressives who are attacking their co-workers or their professors by, again, snitching to the administration on people. And this is seen as progressive. To me, this is not progressive. This would be nothing that would have occurred to me when I was a student activist, that there would be an, activism to get a professor who was, most of these are well-intentioned, but that I disagreed with, but I decided, I'm going to go to the president of the school and get them fired. There is a lack. Yeah, one minute.
Dan?
Okay. There is a lack of willingness to engage in people, particularly in the academy, that I'm seeing, that I think is undermining not just free thought in the academy, but the left itself, I'll just say. And I'll end on this note too. The other thing that I think we all should think about is the fact that, we're still in this historic situation with this pandemic where, there have been these lockdowns of a type we've never seen, certainly in our lifetimes or our parents' lifetimes. There has been no national debate, no congressional hearings about these lockdowns, which have resulted in billions of dollars going to the rich and billions of dollars being lost by the poor. And yet those who have criticized the lockdowns have been often canceled by the left because they've decided that the government and, frankly, the corporations are the ones we should follow, frankly, blindly in all of this. And there's been a little bit of a shift, I think, between the left and the right in terms of how they value debate, how they value free speech. And I think we need to be aware of that. Thank you.
Dan Kovalik, everybody. Thanks so much, Dan, for your thoughts and perspectives. Definitely thought-provoking, and I'm sure some people will have some different perspectives and other things to add, and we're celebrating free speech in the First Amendment today, so I would expect no less.
Thank you.
Our next speaker, Mnar Muhawesh Adley, joins us, editor-in-chief and founder of MintPress News and Behind the Headlines. Mnar, you have the floor.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. Mickey, thank you for inviting me. It's an honor and pleasure to be here on this panel with everybody else. I've learned so much from every single one of you, so I appreciate you inviting me. Just to give you guys a little bit of background information about myself, to know where I'm coming from in my presentation. I'm an independent journalist. I'm the founder and editor-in-chief of MintPress News. And part of our mission as an independent media outlet is to revive the Fourth Estate, to uphold our First Amendment rights in terms of free speech. Part of our mission is to expose the very special interest groups that are influencing policies at home and abroad, and how that affects our civil liberties, and most importantly, how that affects our First Amendment rights, including our free speech rights and journalism in this country, because the United States presents itself as a beacon of democracy that upholds its First Amendment, yet we are living in a time when our First Amendment rights are basically being trampled on and being put in the hands of major corporations and social media tech giants. Some of the coverage that we have been providing to our readers, that we have been very successful in for the past 10 years, is breaking the media blackout on what's taking place in Yemen, the US Saudi-led genocide that's taking place that has resulted in the world's worst humanitarian crisis. 23 million Yemenis today face starvation and could die basically at any point. And that's been the figure that the UN has been providing the public with for the last 2 years. It's a very horrific number. We've also been at the forefront of exposing how lobby groups have been influencing policies and drafting policies to target our First Amendment rights. We've also been at the forefront of covering Israeli apartheid and its war crimes against Palestinians, and how that media coverage has taken shape here in the United States. But although we have been successful in our coverage for the last 6 years or so, we have been facing a major media censorship campaign led by social media tech giants like Facebook, Google, Twitter, Instagram, the whole bunch, who have partnered up with the very think tanks and the ruling class and major figures from the Democratic Party, the Republican Party, and weapons manufacturers to basically control the free flow of information. And this has specifically targeted independent journalists, and the way people are able to access information as a whole. This all, of course, started during the 2016 elections between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump, when Hillary's defeat was basically blamed on Putin, on the Russians. And independent media was then subsequently targeted in a fake news frenzy attack by corporate media and by social media tech giants. They basically began a crackdown through this very McCarthyist campaign to look at independent media as the reason, and being basically working in tandem with the Russians, and also targeting WikiLeaks and Julian Assange, and blaming us for Hillary's defeat. And so what this resulted in is organizations like the Atlantic Council, which is funded by NATO, which is funded by weapons manufacturers, which is funded by the Israeli government, and other oppressive regimes like the Saudi government, and very many of the Hillary Clinton, neoliberal war class. This is who the Atlantic Council is funded by and directed by. And the Atlantic Council partnered up with Facebook to basically crack down on, what people are seeing in their news feeds. And MintPress News at that time, we were getting over between 70,000 and 150,000 unique visitors to our website every single day. We were at the forefront of independent media and journalism. And as an independent media outlet, that was considered, very successful with, considering we weren't paying for any marketing. And so from there, from the 2016 elections, from when Facebook partnered up with the Atlantic Council and other free speech courts that they developed, we started to see our numbers slowly decline. Okay. And we started to see a lot of our news getting flagged as being fake news and the target of so-called fact checkers. And these fact checkers, of course, are run by the very entities that the media, the independent media and the press should be fact checking. They're being funded by the Democratic Party, and these weapons manufacturers and these special interest groups and the Israeli lobby itself. Another major development that we saw was the Anti-Defamation League partnering up with YouTube. And the Anti-Defamation League has a very, very long history as acting as a foreign agent to the state of Israel. At one point in the 1960s, the FBI was going to force the ADL to register as a foreign agent because of its spying and intelligence that it was gathering for the state of Israel. But what ended up happening was that the ADL ended up working in tandem with the FBI to continue its surveillance and intelligence gathering for the state of Israel in the United States. And the Anti-Defamation League has been responsible for weaponizing anti-Semitism, the term anti-Semitism, to target any sort of criticism of the state of Israel. They have gone after people like Ilhan Omar for her statements in regards to saying that that we have to keep track of how much money is going into politics and tracking the Israel lobby's influence on politicians. They've also been responsible for targeting people like Mark Lamont Hill, who was fired from CNN, for his presentation at the UN, where he said, Palestine will be free from the river to the sea. And the ADL came out with a statement actually saying those calling from the river for Palestine to be free from the river to the sea are calling for an end to the state of Israel. It's a shame once again that this annual event at the United Nations does not promote constructive pathways to Palestinian solidarity and a future of peace, but instead divisive and destructive action against Israel. And so this weaponization of anti-Semitism is being used by the ADL to target any sort of dissent and action in terms of exposing Israeli war crimes. In terms of how the ADL has targeted MintPress and other Palestinian voices online, obviously, MintPress, we're not a Palestinian organization. I just so happen to be a Palestinian American. But through this partnership with the ADL, YouTube has taken down hundreds of thousands of Palestinian posts that have been exposing Israeli occupation and crimes and human rights abuses on that platform. In terms of Facebook, in addition to partnering up with the Atlantic Council, has also created a free speech court, which is anything but promoting free speech. It's an oversight board, and it's a body that is to function like a Supreme Court to chat rooms with the power to review any decisions regarding post removals or deplatforming and to make policy recommendations. Members have been drawn from law experts, rights activists, and journalists from around the world. The oversight board currently boasts 20 members. That sounds really fancy and nice, but all of these people that have been put together are very much pro-war. They work in the interest of the ruling class and for the state of Israel, including Emmy Palmer, who is the former director of the Israeli Ministry of Justice, and she was directly responsible for the removal of tens of thousands of Palestinian posts from Facebook. She was also the head of Israel's cyber unit for Israel. And so Emmy Palmer sits on this oversight board, who is now responsible for cracking down on any sort of criticism of Israeli apartheid and human rights abuses. So something that we faced on Facebook, apart from our decline, major decline in readership from this platform, is a lot of our posts getting flagged, as I mentioned before. And also when Palestinians were marching during the Great Return March every single Friday at the Gaza fence border, we were coming out with coverage and cartoons depicting Israeli snipers targeting medics and targeting journalists. And those cartoons were also labeled as anti-Semitic, and Facebook ended up taking those posts down from us.
Left, Mnar?
What was that?
About a minute left. Just
okay.
I'm playing clock hat.
Okay, no problem. With Israel's very close relationship with these social media tech giants, BDS is also being targeted, the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement. Over the past 6 years, 28 states, including the state of Georgia, have adopted anti-boycott laws. The majority of those states have already mandated loyalty pledges to Israel as a means of outlawing dissent. And when it comes to these social media tech giants, they're targeting any sort of coverage and posts about boycotting Israel, again, using the weaponization of anti-Semitism. Today, we're actually seeing the states of New Jersey and Arizona are actually divesting from Ben & Jerry's for Ben & Jerry's decision to boycott Israel. And so we're seeing this kind of war taking place in terms of the free flow of information and what people can know about Israeli crimes. I want to talk a little bit more about independent journalism in general, but I think we're out of time. So I'll just leave it at that, I guess.
Well, thanks so much, Mnar Muhawesh Adley. We'll have time to get into that in the Q&A and other commentary. So everyone here today has so much to say on this really important topic, and we definitely want to hear from everybody. But thank you, Mnar, for that. I've been putting a lot of links in the chat room, by the way. So as people are speaking, I'm putting a lot of things there for people to look at to get additional information. So our next speaker is Nolan Higdon. Nolan is a media studies and history scholar, teaches with us at DVC, among other places. He's author of several books on media, including The Anatomy of Fake News, A Critical News Literacy Education. And also we have a forthcoming book, Nolan and I, from Routledge. It's on critical thinking and discourse called Let's Agree to Disagree, A Critical Thinking Guide to Communication, Conflict Management, and Critical Media Literacy. Nolan, the floor is yours.
All right, thank you very much, Mickey. It's been great. Great to listen to, and it's great to be a part of a panel with so many interesting and thoughtful people. And thank you all for showing up. I want to kind of start today by talking about the possibilities and, I guess, imperfections of the U.S. Constitution. particularly with an eye toward race. I mean, it's critical to note that the U.S. Constitution was designed for the rights of the few, and a lot of people, majority of people, were not included, if you will. I think this is most kind of striking when we talk about slavery, and there's 4 clauses about slavery in the U.S. Constitution. Slaves are counted as 3/5 of a person toward representation. Federal government's empowered to enact fugitive slave laws. Federal government is empowered to put down slave rebellions, and it allows the slave trade to last for 20 years. Even with those problems, clear-cut problems, there were possibilities where the Constitution can be used, that is, the rights of the Constitution can be used to change some of those realities. And generations of abolitionists knew this. That's why they created a abolitionist press. They would hold these large meetings where they would give speeches and engage with people who disagreed with their perspective that abolition, slavery should be a reality. And they weren't just meeting disagreements, they were violently suppressed. Presses were destroyed, people were killed. Folks like Frederick Douglass were beaten nearly to death for speaking about the idea of the abolition of slavery. And this became such a crucial issue. There was even a gag order about talking about it in Congress that was put in as well. Yet these very brave folks from all identities across the United States continue to fight for abolition, using this freedom of speech, freedom of press arguments to try and convince the public they need to change. And there was some measurable success in getting anti-racist discourses in electoral politics. We can think of the 13th, 14th, 15th Amendment, the 1964 Civil Rights Act, Voting Rights Act. And don't get me wrong, there are problems and shortcomings with all of those, which we're not going to talk about today. But it's an illustration of the kind of possibilities of the Constitution, that citizens who use their rights and take aggressive action can achieve some sort of measurable progress. That's what we have here with the Constitution, imperfect possibility, if you will. And in fact, when I was kind of formulating my own political identity, this is why I became a progressive. I grew up during the moral majority, the PRMC, who wanted to censor music, Bush administration, who were trying to equivocate on things like torture and go after whistleblowers. And I wasn't a Democrat because I had turned to the age of reason, but I knew I wasn't going to be a conservative. I wasn't going to support this suppression of free speech, free ideas. And then something interesting happened in 2016. The folks who largely I sided with for years, we had fought for freedom of speech and freedom of expression, freedom of press, all of a sudden started to sound like those neocons of the first 10 years of the 21st century. Something about Trump made liberals kind of question rights. Should we have rights? Do we need rights, or should everyone have rights? And you saw a lot more empathy towards censorship and a less objective press and things like that. Particularly in education, I hear scholars say things like, you can't talk to this side or that side. I wonder why someone would get into education if they didn't think they could reach people. And I think part of this has to do with the internet. Angela Nagel, I know it's a very controversial book, wrote Kill the Normies, but she points out how the 2010s techno-utopianism of liberals created a slacktivist left that basically collapsed. It became inept. And at the same time, it gave rise to an alt-right that was very powerful and co-opted a lot of leftist ideas like transgression and others, and even Gramsci, and used this to kind of what ultimately become the Trump phenomenon here in the United States. So I worry today that we have a slacktivist culture that is trying to achieve these larger goals I think many of us would agree on, but they're using slacktivist methods that work against achieving those goals. So rather than use rights and work hard to take action, as I talked about with the abolition example, they want to empower organization institutions to undermine rights with the hope that it will somehow achieve those goals by undermining rights. I personally think cancel culture is poorly defined, but I'm not interested in the definition, nor am I even interested in what content is being censored necessarily. What I'm more focused on is who is doing the actual censoring? So who is behind the censorship? I think internet users have sort of developed this delusion of power. They think they have the power. Actually, you don't. The tech companies are the ones who are doing the censoring. It's not you. So do we feel comfortable with that? Should big tech be the people who are censoring? Big tech has been rightly documented for having what is called algorithms of oppression. That is, that they return search results and privilege information that perpetuates racism, sexism, and other hateful ideologies. Just this week, Facebook got busted because its artificial intelligence algorithm labeled Black men as primates. We know that Facebook also has a VIP program where certain people, these are celebrities and political elites, they are not held to the same moderation standards as other users. So are we comfortable giving big tech that kind of power to determine what should and should be censored? Are we comfortable giving government the power? Think about it. Do you really want a Donald Trump or a George W. Bush deciding what content can and should and should not be censored, or Rick DeSantis or whoever? Is it corporate America? I know a lot of people lauded Amazon for having a Black Lives Matter banner, but at the same time, they were undermining a Black labor organizer at one of their New York plants. So I think the question we need to look is not necessarily do we disagree with some of the content that possibly is being censored, but who are we empowering in the process of participating in the removal of this content? I personally think it's better to have dialogue and to have these arguments in good faith. I think it's a straw man to say that there are these absolutists on free speech. We've always had some limits on free speech: defamation, libel. You can't yell fire in a theater. So if we're going to talk about these in good faith, we shouldn't create these straw men of absolutists. I think we should also be cognizant of history. When you empower organizations and institutions to censor, they constantly accumulate more and more power. And historically, that power has been used against progressives. Look at the Red Scares, look at McCarthyism, look at the Hays Code, look at the Comstock laws, Operation Chaos, go on and on. So just because today they may be censoring content you don't like doesn't mean those organizations and institutions can't be turned against you. To get a better perspective on this, I think we should also take a global lens. Sometimes we look at this way too much in the US context, so we're really naive to what some of these practices mean. Go look at Hungary, Brazil, Turkey, Saudi Arabia. That can give you some instruction on what these kinds of discourses can lead to. And just look at Afghanistan. Everyone's terrified of the Taliban taking over Afghanistan. Part of the terror is their suppression of rights. They're going to make a determination on what is and is not appropriate. So I think there's a lot of possibility here, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak on this topic. And if anyone disagrees with anything I said, I support your right to take me to task. Thank you.
Nolan, thanks so much for your presentation and sharing your perspectives. Certainly things that we have written about quite a bit over the years in our publications. Next up, we have Professor Sangha Niyogi right here from DVC, co-director of our social justice program. Sangha, it's a delight to have you here as always, and you have a fancy presentation to go along as usual. So with that.
No, I'm just intimidated by all these fabulous panelists, and therefore I needed my PowerPoint. But thank you, Mickey, so much for inviting me. I come here unapologetically with the racial justice perspective on the First Amendment. I think Nolan has already set us up quite well.
You're muted, Sangha.
You're mute.
Censor yourself, Sangha.
Answered myself.
There you go.
All right, so we're back on. So thank you, Nolan, for already pointing out that there were some folks here throughout our history who weren't part of We the People. We the People excluded those other persons who counted for only 3/5 of those who were free. These other persons could be imported, taxed, and sold in a system Congress could change by neither amendment nor legislation before 1808. They, not we, could be returned to slavery against their will because of a constitutional compromise that protected the property rights of slave owners or the rights of sovereign states to choose whether or not to support the institution of slavery. Okay, so fast forward to present times. As a contemporary matter, we are those that the police, the laws, the entire legal system protect from they. I wanted to start there. There's often this idea of the First Amendment is based on the Mill's concept of the marketplace of ideas, the test of the truth or acceptance of ideas depends on their competition with one another and not on the opinion of a censor. We've heard some really valid, important points from our panelists today. I want to remind folks that those protesting for racial justice are tear-gassed, arrested, surveilled in present times. Those engaged in hate speech receive taxpayer-funded protection. So this idea of the marketplace of ideas ignores inequities in racial power that make competition in the social marketplace purely hypothetical. Who is free to speak? That's the question we should be asking ourselves. And you see numerous examples of this. Poor people, immigrants, Black activists, LGBTQI+, are bludgeoned into silence by the constant cry for civility, made to hold still as injustices are visited upon them. Meanwhile, those with no real fear that they'll ever wind up on the wrong side of the power dynamic in America can scold and hector. Civility is the sleep aid of a majority inclined to ignore the violence done in its name, because in the end, they will be all right. And this is the famous meme. Never burned one building, never robbed one store, never destroyed one town. So again, I just share with you the myth versus reality. A Harris poll in early 1968 noted that King had an unfavorability rating among Americans of nearly 75%. This is in fact how he was depicted in 1967 to scare white Americans. In case there's any confusion about the strategy, I plan to lead another non-violent march tomorrow. For King, and more so for the younger generation of student civil rights leaders who initiated sit-ins, freedom rides, non-violence was militant. It was confrontational by design. Often this sort of protest required breaking laws, which is why King went to jail dozens of times. These folks received no protection from the First Amendment. The other example I wanted to share with you is of Standing Rock in everyone's recent memory. And this was the oil pipeline rerouted from upstream of a predominantly white city of Bismarck, downstream through the treaty lands and drinking supply of the Standing Rock Sioux tribe. When the tribe protested, guards used dogs on activists. When people saw images and descended on the reservation from far and wide to stand with Standing Rock, the governor called the National Guard. Protesters who took to calling themselves water protectors squared off with law enforcement agents better armed than many militaries. Again, this is what has been happening in present times. The history of oppression explains why defamation, invasion of privacy, and fraud are exempt from free speech guarantees, while racist and sexist verbal assaults are not. Coextensive with the criminalization of racial justice protesters is the long history of state non-interference with the assembly rights of white supremacist actors. And you see the image there as Stefanczyk and Delgado, critical race theorists, point out that hate speech is rarely an invitation to dialogue. The idea that talking back to the aggressor is wise, sensible, or even safe lacks a sense of reality. Cancel, woke, political correctness, this is not new. All happen to be phrases that can be and have been used to sincerely debate the best way for a society to be inclusive. Not always, but in many cases, that's the whole concept of debate. But that also is perhaps what made them so easily weaponizable. Those original usages imply that there are ideas or words that are not inclusive, right? So each generation changes, right? And therefore, discourse to be inclusive, some speech has to be excluded. And this probably explains again why there's a gap as to what Hispanic Americans and African Americans feel about whether society can prohibit hate speech and protect free speech at the same time. Hate speech versus free speech, what are we talking about here? Speech that expresses or incites hatred toward people on the basis of some aspect of their identity. Hate speech is something that society must take seriously, not dismiss as something that might at worst hurt the feelings of some overly sensitive liberals. There is evidence that hate speech predicts violence, that groups more exposed to hate speech are more likely to commit suicide, and that it causes what scientists call a dehumanization effect, which makes it easier for us to justify suffering and harm caused to another human being. Under current First Amendment jurisprudence, hate speech can only be criminalized when it directly incites imminent criminal activity or consists of specific threats of violence targeted against a person or group. It can be far too easy for people not in risk groups to dismiss speech as empty words or as something which is at worst the kind of spiteful bullying any sensible person would ignore. But our right to safety must include psychological as well as physical safety, and a right not to feel threatened is fundamental to our freedom. Critical race theorists, and of course, I'm limited to my 10 minutes, and Mickey will remind me in a second. But just to remind folks again, CRT is talking about how colorblindness and meritocratic rhetoric serve these functions of allowing folks in power to feel consciously irresponsible for the hardships people of color face. And the reality, again, is that we live in white supremacist culture, and we encounter white supremacist institutions. So CRT offers, again, very cautious approaches to what kinds of racist speech should be prohibited. Communicates, the speech should communicate a message of racial inferiority against a historically oppressed group in an intentionally persecutory and hateful way. So again, if we are living in this reality where we are in a white supremacy, and that's a defining characteristic of our culture, then as implemented currently, instead of helping to achieve healthy and robust debate, the First Amendment actually serves to preserve the inequities of status quo. There can be no such thing as an objective or content neutral interpretation in law in general or of the First Amendment in particular. Now, incitement, of course, I acknowledge, is always an empirical question, and each case must be decided on its own merits, but social research can provide courts with a protocol for a context-specific analysis of political speech. Social researchers who study political communication, persuasion, and effects of discriminatory language can offer evidence-based guidance about the kinds of speech and circumstances that are most likely to produce undesirable effects. For instance, we know that speech from political authority figures is more likely to influence behavior, especially if a figure is perceived by their audience as charismatic, and if their speech is characterized by graphic imagery that draws on powerful historical narratives. An audience that is experiencing economic and political uncertainty is more vulnerable to language that scapegoats a minority population. Speakers that cultivate fear and resentment against target outgroups can motivate some followers to acts of violence, especially when the speaker identifies specific forms of action that can be taken immediately. Does that ring a bell for folks? Something that happened in January? But I will just end by saying that I, of course, am coming from a perspective of combating hate speech. And as a representative of the Racial Justice Task Force, co-director of Social Justice Program, I will continue to critically challenge and unequivocally resist white supremacy. And part of that, of course, is building solidarity. And that's where I do agree with the panelists who are saying that we need to come from this stance of solidarity and look at all the resources available to us to be able to do that. And I'll end with the quote from the Southern Poverty Law Center. Our experience shows that one person acting from conscience and love is able to neutralize bigotry. Imagine then what an entire community working together might do. Thank you so much. I look forward to your questions and discussion.
Thank you so much, Sangha. A riveting and stellar talk as ever, replete with slides. I've been posting various things in the chat room, and I encourage the rest of the panelists, if you have any information that you'd like to share with our audience, remember that this is being recorded and will likely be watched by a lot of different students in different courses. So thinking about things you might want to share that other people will come back to and look at later, you can do that anytime. I also encourage anybody that's here, if you want to post ideas, questions, or comments in the chat, I'm monitoring those as well. Really quickly, I just wanted to thank everybody who is here today. I want to thank, of course, the Student Life Office for inviting me once again to have a platform to share so many what I consider really important ideas and things that we need to be discussing and debating all the time. I think it's really important to hear the different, if even nuanced perspectives from our panelists. And with that, I want to thank Dan Kovalik, Mnar Muhawesh Adley. Oops, there's your time. There's your timer. So, I want to thank Mnar Muhawesh Adley. I want to thank Nolan Higdon, and of course you, Sangha Niyogi, for your brilliant presentations and sharing your perspectives with us today. With that, with the time we have left, which is 30 minutes, slated to 2:10, that's where we said we would try to wrap things up. But of course, we can go for as long as we need, or if people somehow kind of run out of gas, we can finish early, though. I don't see that happening per se, given how much that our panelists have given us to think about and to discuss with us. One of the questions coming in already is becoming involved with organizations like Project Censored. You can go to projectcensored.org that I linked earlier. I'll put my email contact in here. We work with students and professors all over the country. And in fact, I have the great honor of working with Sangha and Albert here in social justice. I have the honor of working with Dan Kovalik doing talks and things around the country. And Dan's been a guest at DVC before. Mnar, I sit on the board of Behind the Headlines and work with her at MintPress News. And of course, Nolan and I have worked for years on various projects together. It's all about the network. It's all about working together. I was reminded earlier this semester for College Day, that if you wanna go fast, yeah, it's great. You can kind of go alone and go as fast as you can and maybe run out of gas along the way. But if you want to go far in social justice work and supporting free speech and these things, that's going far, then we got to try to go together. And in some cases, we have to learn how to talk with each other and again, stand up for the rights of those that are less fortunate and those who are oppressed. And we certainly heard about some of those very marginalized groups here this afternoon. With that, I want to open it up for comments and questions. So I don't see anybody in the chat asking any particular questions yet, but Project Censored does work on the undergraduate level. We do work on K-12 as well these days, all the way through graduate school. I will post some links in the chat for that, including contact information. But who wants to ask anything of our esteemed panelists? Who wants to have comment? Who wants to disagree? The floor is yours. Who's up?
Hi, I'm Levy, and I just have a question about, well, more of a discussion for you guys. So we were talking about media, like controlled, like endorsed sites like Facebook being like paid for by the Israeli government and IDF, and seeing as I'm Jewish descent and my grandparents were granted citizenship in Germany after the Holocaust, but we are all like strictly anti-Zionist. So just wanted to pointer disclaimer out there. Websites like 4chan and 8chan, Stormfront, all those alt-right LARPer-like websites that remain uncensored, but are unendorsed, they are basically reveling in their free speech. How much of an impact do you think those websites have, and is it in comparison to Facebook, which is already proving to be a dying platform, kind of catering to conservative, older people who kind of stay in their little pipeline? How much of an impact do you think those unmonitored, uncensored websites have on everyone?
A fantastic question. Thanks so much for that and for your observations. Who wants to take that? Mnar, do you want to start, or Sangha?
You know, I can take a jab at that one. I'm not an expert on 4chan and those websites, but I know that you and I, Mickey, have had this discussion before, in that, you know, we have to allow a space for critical media literacy and thought. And so when we provide these platforms like Facebook and Twitter, the ones that are being used by the masses, it's very important to allow the public to basically think for themselves and to remove, I guess you could say, the things that are not appropriate. And in the end, those inappropriate things will end up kind of being lowered within those platforms. But in terms of like 4chan, I know that one of the biggest criticisms of websites like 4chan is that it becomes a platform for, very extremist ideology, sometimes child porn, things that are very, very, not good, very bad in terms of, society. But I personally don't know how to address those things. I think, Mickey, you are a better person to speak on those issues.
Nolan, you have your hand up.
Yeah, no, I think, and it's a great question. And Mnar, I think your response was spot on. I guess I would say, first of all, yeah, you're right that the users of like Facebook are getting older and possibly more conservative, but the platform is almost irrelevant. They'll keep developing new platforms. They all are designed in the same way. They use gambling tricks from the gambling industry to keep people addicted to their screen, to give up data that can be sold and weaponized. That's big tech. So that could be your Instagram or whatever, Snapchat, whatever comes out next is going to use those methods. So it's not so much about the individual platform. With things like 8chan and 4chan, I think it's important, and this is where Angela Nagel's work becomes important again, that those platforms emerged out of the techno-utopianism or cyber-utopianism of the 2010s. This is when, remember, it was Occupy Wall Street, the Arab Spring, and the WikiLeaks revolution that leftists, and I was guilty of this myself, kind of uncritically just sort of assumed that the internet was going to deliver on the progressive hopes that they had been waiting for in the 20th century, and it didn't. It became a vapid movement of slacktivists that collapsed and gave space for the alt-right. Beyond, so that's sort of the history of it, but to address your question of how you deal with it, I think this is where Mnar was spot on, which is rather than look at the tech companies and ask them to solve the problem or redesign their platform or beg them to do the right thing, I think those of us, particularly those of us who work in education or journalism, need to look in the mirror and say, like, look at the society around us of how people can't critically think, how people can't analyze, how people can't engage in constructive dialogue, how people can't access or understand journalists, press reports, and accurate information. What have we done to fail the people, I think, is the more important question than kind of begging billionaires like Zuckerberg to do the right thing.
Anybody else want to chime in?
Yeah, I would say I largely agree that as an educator, this is a great opportunity to educate folks. And we have folks like Mickey, critical media literacy education that should start so early in elementary school, right? Because we know everyone's on those devices and have access to everything on the internet. So how do you know where to go? So everyone's vulnerable in that sense. And so empowering our students to know, how to tell the sources. Mickey has his whole list, very accessible list of how do you do the first check as you go and look at a piece? So I think that is certainly important. I also wanted to argue that a lot of this is really organized in the right. It's not just happening organically as well. There's a lot of recruitment happening as well. There's a lot of money that's, resources that folks have. And as an educator also who teaches about critical race and so on, I want to anticipate the attacks that will come as well. So that's the flip side of it. So if I want to keep doing my job, I need the support of my academic senate. I need academic freedom, all of those things. I don't want to be reactive about that. I want to be proactive and see what's coming. And yes, the students will always teach us. We have to always learn because stuff's not happening on Facebook anymore.
So we have a question coming from our guests here today. Can Nolan please elaborate on what he mentioned on people using corporations to undermine rights?
Yeah, I can kind of expand upon that a little bit. This goes back to kind of my slacktivist thesis, which is rather than kind of do the hard work, we beg these institutions to do what we want. So in like the Amazon example, we saw Amazon, or not we, some people saw Amazon as kind of being a vessel of racial justice because they had a Black Lives Matter banner on their website. But I think it conceals the very racist, systematic practices of racism that Amazon helped perpetuate. And when we ask these corporations or turn to these corporations, all we're doing is furthering that problem. And I think that's why you've seen there's a conflict that we need to kind of reckon with, which is critical race theorists like myself have kind of rightly pointed out the systematic nature of racism. But then some of those folks align themselves with neoliberals who want to make racism an individual problem. They want to pay Robin DiAngelo $40,000 to lecture working people about their racism, which makes it an individual problem rather than a systemic one. And so that's what I mean about the ways in which corporations can co-opt or hijack these legitimate movements, use the right rhetoric, but then create processes that work against the very goals we're trying to achieve.
Anybody else want to chime in there? Dan?
Yeah, well, I think the other way that I had mentioned is that, there is this phenomenon in which, again, if we use the term cancel culture, in which people will, again, go above, say, their colleagues' rank, and go to the employer, to the management and say, let's get this guy fired because he said something I found offensive. You saw this at the at the New York Times, for example. And so what has happened is there's a breakdown, I think, of worker solidarity, because we feel like, again, we're activists if we snitch on our colleagues for saying something we don't like, and we actually organize to get them fired. And there's numerous cases of professors who have been fired or threatened with discharge over this. Again, just one example, a crazy example. At Yale, there was that couple who were in charge of residents' life, and they lived on campus, and students pushed for them to be thrown off campus because the wife in the couple relationship, she had refused isn't even the word. She decided not to put out a guideline for Halloween on what type of costumes people should wear. She thought students of an adult age at Yale were intelligent enough to decide what costumes they wanted to wear, to decide not to wear offensive ones, etc. And so students said, oh, she should be fired because she should have told us, not to wear certain costumes. The idea that students would go to the administration, the administrators who make, by the way, hundreds of thousands of dollars a year. Many professors now are adjuncts making a few grand a year. And again, that they feel that this is activism by getting management to go after the workers is ridiculous. But this is what's happening. on a large scale. And to me, it's a misplaced notion of what activism is. And again, it gives power to the corporations, and that's what universities are by and large. They're huge corporations, even if they're allegedly nonprofit, which work to the advantage of a few people. And again, people feel content to embolden them to have more and more power against, the proles at the university.
So I'm seeing some folks have hands up. Briones?
Yeah, hi. So I kind of wanted to ask a question because I thought it was really interesting that multiple speakers, some of them focused on kind of the cancel culture on the left as well as like racial justice efforts. So me and a couple of people I know have like somewhat of an online presence as far as like leftism, like leftist education and stuff. And one thing that we come across very frequently that I've been a little bit unsure about how to respond to is accusations of class reductionism. So if somebody, for example, talks about, like, okay, well, like if under a certain economic theory, that's the understanding, or like, that's what we're focusing on right now in this discussion. We've had our accounts like mass reported and like banned like multiple times. And so another thing that also, sorry, I'm not trying to ramble, but another thing that also has come up has been that kind of, as you guys mentioned, conservatives are often much more willing to participate in debate than neoliberals. But it's very hard to strike a balance between like having a debate in good faith with people and also making sure that there's not like genuine hate messages, coming through the chat or coming through the Twitch stream or whatever's going on. And so I guess kind of to that point, how do you deal with that, like within like the in-group fighting, right? Because when I hear about discussions about social media, I often hear about like conservative students mass reporting a liberal student or like vice versa, but there's this kind of like third thing, which often, has a lot of infighting with it. How do you combat that within a space to make sure it's like healthy for people to participate across lines?
So who wants to jump in on there? That's a fantastic observation and question. Next up will be Albert, then Lance. Who wants to chime in? Panelists? Nolan?
Yeah, I can just say something quickly, not necessarily the whole question. There's one part that kind of jumped out at me, which is about the argument about good faith. And the other panelists can correct me, but I don't think anyone said that conservatives are more or less likely to engage in constructive debate. I don't feel that way. I think none of the other panelists disagree with me, but we'll see. The other thing I wanted to say was about debating on social media. This is something I emphasize a lot in my critical media literacy courses. Social media we call it social media, but that's wrong. It's not social. We should get that out of our head. And these platforms are designed to get people to react. They appeal to lower human emotions of hate and fear. And that's why divisive content is so prevalent and it's shared so often on the internet. And so that's my kind of long-winded way of saying, if you care about any issue, class, race, gender, intersectional analysis, social justice, climate change, if you really care about those issues, you should give those issues the respect they deserve and not try and figure them out or debate them on social media. Social media is not the venue to responsibly discuss those issues. So I would argue, if you're going to look to make progress on those issues, don't do it in a social media venue.
Anyone else want to address on the panel?
Yeah, again, I would very quickly build your critical thinking skills so that, you feel empowered as you are arguing your point. And second is there's a lot of baiting that happens. I know this from my extended family, so-called family friends. I don't have the emotional energy for it, so I will nip it right there. Nah, they don't want to necessarily hear the other person's perspective, so I'm not going to engage in that.
Albert Ponce.
Yeah, no, I'm enjoying, thank you all, this great panel. And hearing from the students, Briones' point, I think, was getting at how eager right? The way I understood it, how eager conservatives are to take on academics or intellectuals or other leftist students. And that is, I think, a common theme, right? And that's, I think, shifts to the focus where I just wanted to add some nuance to this discussion about platforming, right? Platforming. Not providing a platform for fascists or for, just instigators on a university campus. We know we have big issues about bringing certain controversial speakers to a university campus, which universally speaking should be that marketplace of ideas. But even historically speaking, we know notions of justice or rights have never been universally applied, right? Even if we idealize that origin story from the city-state of Athens to Rome, right? That was very exclusive, very, very classed, to use these comments, very race, very gendered, who's doing the labor while all others are engaged in this vivid, battle over freedom of speech. So that's where I think we can add something. Anybody can say anything, right? And the Constitution, with all its flaws, I'll be the first to say it, and echo former Supreme Court Justice Thurgood Marshall, was rotten from the beginning. But it allows us an entryway in that juridical realm to gain rights. And then we see the progress that has been made. But where I would stand firmly against always is giving a platform to fascists, to put them on equal level of those of us who are engaged, and bringing them on to a university campus, right? When I say they, I mean the ruling classes, the corporations, Amazon, Facebook, Twitter. They control everything that all of society breathes and takes in every moment. We have this space here to try to counter that through critical analysis, to critical thinking, and that's where the work goes. So I applaud, the panelists and all your views, and we know how freedom of speech is rooted in inherent power structures. And I'm just enjoying. I want to hear from students. It's great.
Anybody else want to address that, or will we move to Lance? Lance?
Hi, here, video. I had a question about, sorry, I wrote a bunch of questions, but I'll just answer one for brevity's sake. I was noticing with the talk of like anti-defamation leagues on YouTube, and also how much I frequent the platform, that it's become more and more like invasive in what they want to censor. And do you think that like these are the same people who have been censoring and like, I guess censoring is the best word, talks of genocide around the world, especially that in India, and I'm sure countless other ones that I just am unaware of. And what do you guys think is this new reason, like, is the reason for this new trend in like censorship of genocides, especially now that we're in this post-Holocaust era?
Panelists?
Could answer that a little bit. The ADL, I kind of mentioned this in my presentation, but the ADL historically has acted as an agent to the state of Israel. And one of its main talking points is, or one of its main tools, I guess you could say, is weaponizing anti-Semitism and showcasing the Holocaust that took place against, Jews, but not recognizing the current genocide that's taking place against Palestinians. Any sort of discourse or discussion about that, they flip it around and turn it into a discussion about anti-Semitism. In terms of talks of genocide taking place by the Hindu Vita nationalist movement in India, Israel is working hand in hand with the Modi government to arm that repression of Muslims there. And the United States and Israel both have armed the Indian government to place nearly 500,000 soldiers to occupy Kashmir and to suppress the Muslims there and basically build up what can be described as another miniature apartheid state. And so there's a lot of correlation there. And so the ADL acts 100% in tandem with Israel's national security state, with its military state, with any sort of agenda that Israel has in terms of its foreign policy. The ADL is going to represent all of Israel's interests through its role basically on YouTube or in its surveillance and intelligence gathering for the state of Israel?
Great question, Lance. And I'll add to that too, because I grew up in India, born and, raised there till I was 18. And it's a very different India right now. I wouldn't say that Islamophobia is a brand new thing, but the extent to which it has the state apparatus of totally like doing this and changing our textbooks, rewriting history, is just alarming to watch, right? And again, I would emphasize that there's a lot of money. There's a lot of money that Hindu fundamentalist immigrants from the US send to the Modi government to support all of this kind of changing the laws and new laws. There's a brand new one that's called a law against love jihad. I don't know if folks have followed that, where they are trying to ban interreligious marriages, right? Because the idea is that Muslim men are marrying Hindu women to convert them. So it's just really alarming what's happening right now. And I would just again say that this First Amendment, free speech, whatever we're thinking about, doesn't exist in a vacuum, right? So it's within this institutionalized attack sometimes that's happening, right? So whether it's our educational system, it's our mass media, right? All of these other institutions create that context within which speech is happening. So this dialogue, which we are imagining as this, freedom of ideas, exchange happening in an ideal world, yes. But then you have these structures of white supremacy, of patriarchy, of Hindu fundamentalism that are shaping the scope of that dialogue. So thank you for that question, Lance.
Can I respond to that, Mickey?
Please.
This is actually something I discuss a lot in my books and in my lectures, Lance, and I appreciate the question. I mean, first, what I would say is that the question of genocide has been politicized greatly since World War II for very specific aims. In fact, I would point you to a great little book. It's very short. You can read it very quickly, called The Politics of Genocide by the great Edward S. Herman, which is one of my little Bibles carried around in my back pocket. No, I'm kidding about that. But no, it is a great book. And what it talks about, and I think it gets to what you're saying, is how genocide, the term, is used selectively, depending on the aims that are being pursued. And so, for example, Samantha Power, who's now head of USAID, she was ambassador to the United Nations under Obama. She's considered this great thinker on genocide. Her book on genocide won a Pulitzer Prize called A Problem from Hell. And it's a 1,000-page book. And her point in the book is that the West doesn't do enough to stop genocide. But she never talks about the genocides the West creates. She doesn't mention Korea, which I think was a genocide. The US committed genocide in Korea, committed genocide in Vietnam, killed millions in those theaters, okay? But then, people like Power are more worried about, frankly, much smaller genocides because they want to use those as a reason to go to war. Like in Libya, they claimed Gaddafi was going to commit a genocide. In fact, the NATO bombing and the Obama administration, which led that, facilitated a genocide. They said there were black mercenaries being brought in by Gaddafi to fight his war. That was a lie. That has been debunked. And as a result, the jihadists the US partnered with in Libya went after people with black skin after the invasion, depopulating whole towns of sub-Saharan Africans, killing sub-Saharan Africans. Now sub-Saharan Africans are being sold as slaves on the street of Libya. This is a fact. You can look this up, okay? Obama helped do that. He helped create a genocide, but we don't care about those genocides. We only care about those that can justify war. The other thing I will just say and close is, I find it interesting. Most people care more about speech that could lead to genocide than actual genocides. If one was worried about bringing a genocidaire to campus to talk, you would not have Barack Obama come to campus. He is a genocidaire. Look at Yemen. Millions will die because of the war Obama started there, and no one will say he shouldn't come to campus to speak. And I wouldn't say that either. By the way, I think he should come to campus. But I find it interesting, people care much more about speech than mass murder that people like Obama and Trump and Biden carry out. That is not of concern. And I would just have people meditate about that, because I think it's just a fact that there is this bizarre lack of care about actions and more about speech and people's thoughts.
Why? Why is that happening?
Because it's easier. Because it's easier for me to try to get my professor fired for saying something stupid than to stop a war in Yemen, or to stop a war in Syria that's very complicated. We go after targets of opportunity. We knock down a statue because that's easy. But we don't stop millions of people from being killed in the Middle East.
We're indifferent. Yeah.
We're indifferent, or we just feel powerless. Okay, so we're not going to deal with that. That takes a lot of freaking work.
Yeah.
But it doesn't take work for me to go on Twitter or Facebook and get someone fired. That's easy. I can do that in my bed in my fuzzy slippers. So that's what we do. That's why we do it.
We are also mass propagandized by a corporate media where all of these major corporate entities, from the military industrial complex, big pharma, fossil fuels, et cetera, those corporations are the ad revenue for the 6 major companies that control the media narratives, and they tend to guide the discussions. And this further pushes people in this country to often choose the wrong battles, because many people do not have critical media literacy skills, which is why we've specifically hitched critical media literacy pedagogy to the social justice program. Because no matter what your first area of interest is, as you heard Nolan say earlier, as Nick Johnson said for the FCC, if your second area of interest isn't media reform, media democracy, or true free press principles that allow this information to get to the public, you're likely going to gain little ground in these primary areas of interest, specifically around social justice matters, I would argue. So Dan, thanks so much for that reminder. I want to be mindful that we are technically out of time. However, I'm willing to continue because there are a few people that we didn't get to. One is our own Emily Moss, and the other, very quickly, there is a question about performative activism on social media platforms, reposting shallow infographics, promoting research. Wondering, is this damaging in the sense that this type of activism is fleeting, like a flavor of the month, which people forget? In other words, this is looking maybe at this online form of activism. Anybody want to address that quickly?
If I could, I mean, again, I don't want to monopolize it. I'll just go back to what I said. I think it's done because it's easier to do that sort. It's easier to wear a dress with something on it to a fancy ball that you're going to have a great time at and get drunk at than to actually do real activism. Again, I just think, that's why people do it. They opt for it. They take the easy way out. And is it effective? No, it's not effective at all. It's probably counterproductive, but people do it because it's easy. And if I could quote, Dumbledore, for those of you who like Harry Potter, we live in a time where you can choose what is easy and what is right. And I urge you to choose what is right. With that, I got to go. It's after 5 o'clock here. I got to make dinner.
Yeah.
All right.
Thanks, Dan.
Right,
I will quickly add to Dan's comment that you definitely always want to do what's right, but you also want to be effective. And as an educator, I'm always thinking about that. How do I grab my students? How do I grab their attention? And so social media, I believe, when you wed it with critical media literacy, can be a tool to get folks engaged. I'm not saying it's ever a substitute for having organized, activism on the ground, right? It can never be a substitute for that. But I do believe it has potential to get folks engaged and just not apathetic, so I'll take it.
Last comment. Thank you so much, Dan Kovalik, for your time.
Thank you, Sangha. Thank you, everyone.
Us. Emily, this is a great segue to the final question. I'm sorry we didn't get to everybody, but Emily, you had something that's very related to this, I think.
It is very related. So hi, everyone. I'm Emily Moss. I'm a librarian at DVC Pleasant Hill. So my question, which I asked in the chat, is, are any of our panelists on social media? And if so, how do they reconcile their participation on those platforms with the critique of the platforms? Because I'm thinking about the info literacy class that I teach, where we look at Twitter, and we specifically look at Twitter as a place to find information sources. And I'm sure that they could find, if they wanted to learn more about Nolan's work, for example, they could look at his Twitter account. And without dismissing any of the very real problems that exist with those platforms and with big tech, I also wonder if it's valuable to acknowledge that there are some benefits to those platforms, or we wouldn't be using them, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Fantastic point and question. Yes, I know I use social media platforms, maybe different ones than Nolan. Nolan's very active on Twitter. I'm way more active on Facebook. Guess I'm showing my age. Instagram, I've chosen to not use very politically for different reasons. And I know everybody makes those distinctions. And we teach critical media literacy courses. We just wrote a new critical media literacy book for young people called The Media and Me that'll be out next year, that does not demonize technological use. It merely educates people as to how they can be used by technology while trying to navigate it in the best possible ways to get what they want out of it. So it's not an either or, it's a both and, in my estimation. And I use Facebook to criticize Facebook. I use my radio show on Pacifica Radio at the very end when I sign off. I say, please follow our work at Project Censored on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter before we're deplatformed, right? Right? You know, to call attention to the issue that it's happening. But I think you're right. We don't want to just dismiss the platforms. We want to look at what people are doing and how they're using the platforms. And part of critical media literacy pedagogy is teaching people, A, not how to be used by it, and B, how to best use it. Again, I'm repeating, but how to best utilize that and how to reach certain audiences. And also, given that these technologies are not accessible to everybody, but are becoming more ubiquitously accessible to everybody because they're data mining operations. They're not giving you these things for free. You're giving them data, right? And so that encourages people to use them unmindfully and giving over too much information. But if you teach people how to use these things more thoughtfully, I think they can be brilliant tools, ones of many, in the broad toolbox of how we get our messages across to people in the world. I think Mnar had to leave us because we're running over. Sangha, you want to chime in here? We're the last one standing.
Oh, yeah, no, I think I said it in response to the previous comment as well, that I'm always learning from my students too, and always learning from Emily. She's fabulous with just organizing things online. So let's keep doing that. Thank you so much, Mickey, for inviting me to the panel. It was great fun as usual.
Well, I'm honored to have had the opportunity from Student Life. Emily, I would love to follow up with you and work more with the library on our information literacy program. So I will definitely do that. And I'd love to have you speak in our classes about these things because this is, again, all today's topic on Constitution Day about free speech. Even though some of us have different angles and different ideas, I think we need more of it. We need more voices, more diversity, and I will echo Sangha. I think it's an honor and a privilege to be able to teach and be a professor, especially at the Apple Valley College, where we have such amazing colleagues, fantastic students, and it's a place that really does honor academic freedom and really does support, I think, as good as any institution can, all of us in our many endeavors to help students achieve success, but also to help all of us lead better and more equitable lives. So with that, I want to thank everyone for being here. This has been recorded, so it will go up. Sangha, thanks so much, as always, for everything that you do. Albert, you too. I want to thank our panelists that had to leave, including Nolan Higdon, Mnar Muhawesh Adley, and Dan Kovalik. This chat room will also be accessible to everyone. I'll be posting this on my classes. The links will be available. If you want to get a hold of me, mhuff@dvc.edu. I look forward to the rest of the semester, several other events, and I wish everybody a great week and a great rest of the semester. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you everyone for being on. I put a survey. This is